All right, let's go ahead and get started, even though I still see some people are still slowly trickling in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. And welcome to the next session in our series of modern mainframe DevOps webcasts. This one's called Mainframe Automation, Fast Track to a Continuous Integration. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Len Thompson, and I am Broadcom's Mainframe Division Community Manager. And again, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Before I hand you off to Michael Bauer, just want to let you know that we are recording today's session, which is why you're all currently muted. If you do have questions along the way, please use the questions box along the right side of your screen to ask them. And I will, when it's time for questions, I'll go ahead and read those to Michael, and he can answer as many of those as we can today. If we have time at the end, I will also let you know how you can have your line unmuted if you prefer to ask your questions that way. The recording of today's session will be posted out in several of our Mainframe DevOps related communities like Brightside and Endeavor. And speaking of communities, just want to let you know that we have completed our migration to the new platform as part of the Broadcom transition. So I'd like to invite you to visit community.broadcom.com and get back into the communities. The last thing for me is that we are always trying to make sure these sessions are as valuable as possible. So with that in mind, I have created a survey that will appear at the end of the webcast. It's just a few questions, so I'd really appreciate you taking a couple minutes to give us some feedback on the session today. And with that out of the way, I'm going to hand things off to Michael. So take it away, sir.
Thanks, Len, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar titled Mainframe Automation Using Zowe, Fast Track to Continuous Integration. I'm the presenter for today. My name, as Len mentioned, is Michael Bauer. I'm a senior product owner here at Broadcom. I'm responsible specifically for the CA Brightside command line interface, which was recognized as the most innovative DevOps solution of the year for 2018. So if there are any team members on the line, congratulations for that recognition. From a Zowe perspective, I'm the Zowe CLI squad lead. And before transitioning into this current role, I was a developer for traditional mainframe system applications. I'm based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So today's agenda, I'll briefly cover an overview of Zowe. And along the way, this is intended to be a fairly technical webinar, but I'll point you to resources to help you get more information if you are unfamiliar in these areas or looking for more introductory level content. So the Zowe overview, there's an introductory webinar of it available on demand at devops.com. It's titled Bridging Modern DevOps in the Mainframe. There's also a webinar covering the API mediation layer and command line interface. That webinar is available also on demand at devops.com, and it is titled Mainframe DevOps Using Zowe Open Source. And then we'll dive into, after I briefly cover those two topics, we will dive into more of the demonstration portion where we talk about constructing scripts using the Zowe CLI to automate the build, deployment to a test environment and actual testing of a ZOS application. And then we will demonstrate the setup and execution of these scripts from a CI tool, in this case Jenkins. And I'll try to leave some time at the end for some Q&A. So before I dive in, I want to cover the Zowe architecture at a high level. But before even covering that, just in case there are folks on the line who are unfamiliar with Zowe, Zowe is part of the Linux Foundation's Open Mainframe project, and it is the first open source project based on ZOS. The intent for Zowe is to be the open source mainframe interface for the next generation. It bridges enterprise DevOps to the mainframe. It shifts the mainframe balance of power from vendors and proprietary to the community and open source software. And it also makes mainframe an exciting opportunity for new developers. It allows them to use tools that they are familiar with. So at a high level, the architecture of Zowe, we have a bunch of microservices becoming available on ZOS, whether that's ZOSMF REST APIs, Endeavor REST APIs, or what have you. And as you have more and more microservices becoming available, you need a way to manage and scale that. The API mediation layer offers that. So there are three main pieces to the API mediation layer. There's a catalog where developers can go view what services are available. There's a gateway so that all your network traffic is routed through a single host and port so that you can easily control access and what's reaching your microservices. And then finally, a discovery service so that as microservices become available, they appear in the catalog for visibility. Beyond that, there are two visualization layers. One is the Zowe Web Desktop, which provides an interactive user experience. And there's also the CLI, which you can use interactively, but the main context in which we present the CLI and we'll present today, the power is that you can abstract these commands into scripts to automate more complex actions. And finally, there's also a lightweight editor built on top of the CLI in the form of a Visual Studio Code extension. So Visual Studio Code is a popular lightweight text editor, and it's growing in the market. Up over 50% of folks developers use Visual Studio Code, and that's from a recent Stack Overflow survey. All right, so the Zowe CLI, it's a command line interface into ZOS. It enables developers to script and develop on the mainframe just like any other cloud platform. It allows them to make use of familiar industry standard open source tooling. And by accomplishing these things, it addresses the skills gap by making mainframe development more attractive and accessible to next generation developers. And it also improves the application delivery lifecycle by allowing these ZOS applications to be integrated into enterprise DevOps pipelines. So this graphic sort of illustrates the value of the CLI. So you can think of there's CLIs into familiar cloud environments like Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, etc. Where we have created a CLI into ZOS. And what that is, what it allows you to do is it allows you to make use of modern open source technology. So if you're familiar with scripting in Python or Ruby or JavaScript, it allows you to script in those and orchestrate tasks on ZOS. If you want to use popular CI orchestration tools like Jenkins, for example, you can do that. Modern task runners like Gulp and Gradle, testing frameworks like Mocha, assertion libraries like Chai, and in familiar IDEs like maybe IntelliJ or Visual Studio Code, as I'll be showing in the demo later, etc. So if you have a popular tool you are experienced with and want to make use of it in ZOS development, the CLI can help you there. So sort of beyond Zowe, CA Brightside is our comprehensive support offering for Zowe. So we offer comprehensive support for Zowe throughout the full life cycle, from initial testing and experimentation through adoption at scale, and beyond even support. We offer a few additional value adds, such as simplified and streamlined installation through a Windows installer, and also easier use of the CLI in a pipeline, which we supply a Docker image, which I'll show the use of today, as well as early access to innovations, such as our secure credential store plugin, ZOS Extended Files, and ZOS Extended Jobs plugins. So now I'll get into sort of the meat of the webinar and provide a comprehensive demonstration of the Zowe command line interface, how to abstract these commands into scripts, and ultimately set up and use them in a Jenkins pipeline. So let's get started. Pull up here. Okay. So I have the Zowe command line interface installed, and I mentioned earlier that Zowe.org was a great place to get started. So if you're interested in downloading the CLI, it's as simple as clicking the download button to try it out, downloading the command line interface, agreeing to the end license agreement, and then it downloads the package locally. There's also means to install from an online registry as well. But again, for a central reference point, Zowe.org is a great place for information. So I've installed from here, and if I just issue the Zowe command at a high level here, it will show me all the services I can interact with. So on here we see CICS, PB2, Endeavor, FileMaster Plus, Ops, as well as a lot of core ZOS functionality, which is we're interacting through the ZOS management facility, ZOSMF in this case. So just a demonstration of a simple command here. If I go into a specific group, so files, I can go down layer by layer. So let's say I wanted to list some files on ZOS. So we files list data sets, and when you fully qualify a command, you can do -H to find more information about the correct syntax. And here, I see a bunch of examples, and if I wanted more detail on the specific usage, I see that in the help as well. So just maybe a simple command. I want to list all the data sets for this user. So HLQ. So I have a lot of data sets underneath that high-level qualifier. I can also go maybe more detailed. So I just have one data set come back, and I could get the attributes of that data set. And there's a lot of information I can gain through the CLI. And since it's just a command line interface, I can make use of it in any text editor or IDE that has an integrated terminal. So for example, I can run Zowe commands in here as well, and it's the same experience. Okay, so maybe just another command from a plugin perspective is let's issue an Endeavor command. So we look at Zowe Endeavor. I can see it offers a variety of actions. Specifically, I want to retrieve an element. So I have this command ready to go. I want to retrieve this element marble 22 from my Endeavor sandbox. If you notice over here, there is no marble 22 element. I can run this command, and it will pull the element locally. And now I have the COBOL file. But one piece here is that you may not want to this is a single command, but even a single command you may not want to run over and over again and recall the syntax for. That is where task runners play a critical role in making this more efficient. And while I'm speaking of efficiency, one thing I want to mention and to keep in mind throughout this demonstration is that we have an internal ROI assessment, and prior to Zowe enabling the team to build automation, similar to the automation I'll show today, team members spent approximately 60% of their time on the setup, the build and deploy task, and about 40% of their time coding. But with Zowe-enabled automation, and by using the CLI, they now spend approximately 90% of their time on coding and only 10% on setup, build, and deploy tasks, which allows them to develop higher quality apps even faster. So I'm going to show sort of the first instance of automation in the form of using a task runner. Now, build tasks can be done in many ways, but using a dedicated task runner for running build tasks will enable easier organization, readability, and allow you to be quicker in your development activities. So in this case, the task runner I'm using is Gulp, and all the scripting is contained in this Gulp file .js here. And underneath the covers, they're all running Zowe CLI commands. And I can look at the available help task by issuing Gulp help. And I can see these are the available tasks. And also, if you prefer a button, there's integration with VS Code as well, so I can click these to run the task. So just a simple example is that that Zowe Endeavor retrieve element command. I could easily build out another task fairly quickly. I have this sort of automation already built. To extend it is fairly easy. So it's just as simple as copying almost an existing task here, changing the name of the task. So let's just say pull, and in this case we pulled marble 22, and we'll just replace command with the command we want to use here. And then we save. And then if I run the gulp help again, I can see the gulp pull come here. And if I delete, just to show it working, I can delete marble 22 COBOL, and now I can run gulp pull. And I see it appear over here, just as before. And I also have a pull command now in my gulp task. So that's how you can quickly build out automation with the help of the Zowe CLI. So now I want to do something a little bit more significant, and some of this automation I've built. You can, in our case, we can run gulp build, which will build our source on Endeavor. And then we can deploy our code to some test environment and ultimately test our code. So that's what I'm doing here with gulp build. I can do gulp deploy. And while I'm running this, it doesn't take too long to run, but I want to highlight a couple of resources you can make use of outside of this webinar. So one is github.com/Broadcom. If you go to there, and then you'll see this search bar. You can search Brightside, and there's various samples to help folks get started. So I'll show the Jenkins sample in a bit, but the Brightside scripting samples, the content from this webinar, I will post underneath the samples. I'll post underneath this webinars folder so that you can reference it later as you try to make use of the CLI in your development processes. So let me get back. Okay, so I see the deployment has succeeded. So the next piece is, now that I've built and deployed my code to some test environment, I want to test that code. So we would make use of an automated testing framework. So utilizing a framework for automated testing can increase a team's test speed and efficiency, improve test accuracy, and they are essential. These frameworks are essential to efficient automated testing process for various reasons. One is you can make use of popular scripting languages that folks are experienced with. You can have visibility into things like code coverage. You can have easy report generations. Another key value add is having available assertion libraries like chai. So you can just do like assert.equal to test whether or not two values are equaled. And there's a lot of benefits to running these things and making use of automated testing frameworks. So the one we make use of is actually Mocha in this sample, and I'm going to run npm test. But basically, npm test, we have these scripts in our package.json, and it's just kicking off this Mocha test with Mocha Awesome Reporter. So if you make use of the Mocha testing framework, you can make use of this reporter and get nice reports for basically free. So I'll do npm test. And this is just testing our sample application here. So the test was, it should create a single marble, and then if I look at the Mocha Awesome report that was generated, I can see we get this sort of reporting structure. Okay, so now that we've built, deployed, and tested our code locally, manually, by kicking off these scripts, I want to talk about continuous testing and Docker agents. So, there's a lot of value of using CI tooling. I'll just mention a few. One are that, I just tested this on my machine using sort of a snapshot of the code base. CI ensures that everything that is moving forward in your development processes is properly tested. And the value of using a Docker agent to test it is, maybe you've heard developers on the team say, well, it works locally, and maybe it did, but by using Docker containers to ensure where you're deploying it to matches where you're testing it, you can ensure that everybody's tests are running in the correct environment. So there's no sort of an environment dependencies or oddities. It also can increase your code coverage and transparency across the team. So you'll be able to see reports of your code coverage in your CI tools, and also you can see whether or not builds are passing or failing. And you can see that if you have a lot of consecutive builds passing, you can gain confidence in your delivery process. So next I want to talk about setting up Jenkins. And one great reference here is back to Broadcom GitHub. You can go to this Brightside Jenkins sample, and it contains a Jenkins config markdown file, which contains all the information on getting started with Jenkins and Docker and making use of the CLI in this environment. And I will, use this material as we go through the webinar today. So I'm not going to cover some of the broader steps. So installing Docker, we offer a link to Docker's site on their installation process. So you might be installing it on whatever platform you desire. In today's case, I'll be using a Ubuntu Linux machine. You can install Jenkins following this link. There's also information on you'll need to install the Docker plugin, which I will make use of, and then I'll show how to configure this using Docker with Jenkins pipeline. But basically, we have a Jenkins file, which is it's informing Jenkins on on sort of the pipeline definition. And I'm just going to walk through this sort of piece by piece and explain everything that would need set up for you to run this in your environment. But one thing I'll make note of is it's making use of the same scripts we already built for our local testing. So this label is the first thing, agent. So pipelines there's workers that run these pipelines, and in this case, we want our pipeline to run in a Docker image. So this label, Zowe agent, I have some Docker image in Jenkins defined for this to run in. So let's talk about this setting up Jenkins to communicate with Docker first. So let me go into here. And the first thing you would do when setting up a project, like the one I would show, is if you're in your Jenkins UI, you can click New Item. You can type in the name of an item. So let's say, maybe it's just example. And the examples I'm running with today are multi-branch pipelines. So if I have different branches and I make a code change, it will kick off the pipeline and ensure everything's still working. So you could do this, and you can set this up however you need. So like branch sources for your source code, it can be in Bitbucket, Git, GitHub, and this is your test code, right? You can be interacting with some remote some source living on ZOS. Like in our case, all the source for the application is in Endeavor, but the test and orchestration logic and Jenkins file is all in GitHub. So we select GitHub, and I'll show. Let's look at one that has this completed. So if I go to right side, public workshop. We look at the configurations. We can see in this case, I'm going to public GitHub with my public GitHub credentials, enter the name. This is my personal GitHub account and the repository I'm interacting with. So that's how you set up your Jenkins, your project. But now to make sure Jenkins can speak to Docker, you can go to Jenkins, manage Jenkins, configure system, and if you have the Docker Jenkins plugin installed, if you go to the bottom, you'll see this this cloud property section. So here I have Docker, and if when you set this up, you'll need to specify the TCP port that's open for communication to Docker. And just to show this from what the notes section here is, let me put this on one screen so you can see it, and we will make this half a screen. Okay, great. So you can issue this, you want to update your Docker host daemon to listen on TCP port 4243. You can issue this command to see where the Docker service file is located. And again, this may vary for what environment you're setting this up on. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we can provide guidance. This is specifically for Linux distributions. So status Docker, it'll give me the location of the Docker service file. And what you will need to do is you would stop the Docker service, and then you would open and edit the file. I've already done that to set this up, and I'll show you that. So if I look in that service file, what we've added is this piece to open, to have the Docker host daemon listen on TCP port 4243. And then what you can do to make sure it's connected is you just want to click test connection, and it'll come back with the version and an API version, and you know your connection is good. If you want to make sure you're connecting, maybe you have multiple Docker host URIs and you're making sure, I mean, this is just running on local hosts, but you could put your Docker hosts anywhere. Just if you wanted to check this version, you can use the Docker CLI and issue Docker version, and it'll inform of the version and API version, and you'll notice these match what these are displayed. Once you have that connection established, you just have to create a Docker agent template for the Zowe agent. And we offer multiple Docker images that are all set up for communication with Jenkins to connect over SSH. So these Docker images, beyond having the CLI installed and configured, ready to go, it also has a SSHD and a JDK installed. In our example, we're just using a non-verifying verification strategy with the Jenkins credential. If you have questions on these properties as you're filling them in, and again, we have general guidance available here in case you want to reference back. But if you have questions, there's a great question mark over here in Jenkins, or Jenkins informs of what all these properties mean. So that's how you set up the Zowe agent here. If we return to the Jenkins file, we see Zowe agent here. The rest is we set up some environment variables which contain, some of our connection information that we're okay with sourcing, but there's some connection information and details that we would not want to source. So for example, EOS host, because I'm going to share this on public GitHub later, I might not want everyone to see the value of the IP address I'm interacting with, and maybe I don't want folks to necessarily know the username password combinations that I'm using to interact with these services. Now you can make use of, I said, if you're using this locally, you can make use of our Brightside Secure Credential Store plugin. It's one of our latest innovations. But if you're using this in a CI environment, it's likely that, I'll leave this, it's likely that you would want to make use of the credential store in Jenkins. So here's the credential store, and we'll see I have two set up here. So if I go to the Zowe workshop, I can see the one specific to this project. So the host IP of the system, EOS credentials. If you wanted to add a credential, you can put, if it's the username and password, just user password, and then you supply some ID. So in our case, we had EOS creds. Whatever ID you specify here is, let's go back. Whatever ID you specify there is how you access that in the Jenkins file. So you don't want to source cred. Maybe you don't want to source hostname. Another benefit of not sourcing hostname is you can just change which remote environment, which L part you're interacting with by changing it in the Jenkins UI rather than changing it in some config in source. So here we just provide the credentials ID, and then we do the same thing with EOS host. And these names we're storing the values in. The CLI has the concept of command line precedence. So first, it'll look for information supplied on the command itself. Then it will look to see if there's any information contained in Zowe _opt_ the name of the property. And then finally, it'll go to the concept of profiles. So for example, if I did Zowe files list dataset and just provided the help here, we would see that there's a property called host, and that's what this is taking care of. So Zowe _opt_ host, we're making sure that's assigned that value so it overrides anything else. And we're not making use of profiles here because we only want to store this information in the secure credential store, and that's it on Jenkins. Okay. So once I have that set up, then within the credentials piece, I'm going to just call it bulk build task, so that every time I'm making a change here, I'm testing it, running through the pipeline on Jenkins. And another thing you can do is Jenkins can be triggered with like a post. So if you had a pipeline set up and the test and orchestration code was maybe pretty static in GitHub, and you wanted to kick that off just every time you made a change on Endeavor, you could just you do a post to the Jenkins URL, and that would kick off the pipeline for you. Okay, let me return to Jenkins now, Zowe workshop. Okay, so here I have my master branch, and here we'll just manually kick off the pipeline. Now, while that is running, we can look at maybe the test results of a previous run, and we can see you get all this information archived. So if something failed, you'd have visibility into here. You can archive pretty much anything you desire here. We're running the test. I decided to archive the test reports. So go back to master here. You can also have this plugin called Blue Ocean. So if you open that, it just provides another UI for you to work in. So you see we're doing the local setup, and we provide some details on like what version we're using and things of that nature. Okay. One last piece I wanted to show. While this is running, we can return and show its completion. But back to this resource here is we provide, again, all the information that was covered here on the Jenkins and Docker setup is available in this GitHub, this Brightside Jenkins sample. And just navigate to the Jenkins config markdown file, and it gives you information about all the plugins that were used, as well as the specific Docker image we were using and other Docker images that are available. Let me see here. Okay, so now the Jenkins pipeline is passed, so we can see the build. So we're building the COBOL and LNK element on ZOS and Endeavor. We're deploying the element. So here in the build, we're making use of the CA Endeavor plugin for the CLI. Here with the copying, we're copying a DBRM and load lib from a library produced from our Generate and Endeavor to some test environment, and we're making use of the FileMaster Plus, CA FileMaster Plus plugin to accomplish that. We're submitting a job for the bind and grant, making use of the ZOS MS service. And finally, we're doing a Kix refresh, which is if you were on ZOS, you would issue a Kix new copy to refresh that. And just since we have a little bit of time left beyond this, I just want to show quickly a couple of different services you can interact with the CLI. So this is an example. We can do, I want to show a CICS command because we're using that in this case. So if we want to, for example, list all, if we want to get, here we're looking at our CICS programs. We can look at the program status and length easily. We can see whether or not, they've been loaded or whether they've been changed. And you can also, if we go to Zowe, just to show some of the commands we were using in this pipeline, Zowe FileMaster Plus, we were using the copy action, and we were copying data sets. And if we look at the help, it gives us an example on how to do this. Again, all this sample content will be available. And if you look at the gulp file, the automation is, you can look at the Kix refresh and you can see sort of the command we were making use of. Similar for, so that's Kix, similar for Endeavor and the generates, and so on. So with that, let me see if there's anything else I want to mention about this setup really quick in the Jenkins environment. One more piece is if you set this up one time and you want to set it up again for another project that's fairly similar, you can do something like if you go to new item here, you can enter something, but you could also do like copy from, we just did Zowe Workshop. And then this would copy pretty much all your configuration and Jenkins configuration I showed, and copy it into another project. Okay, so just to quickly recap, we demonstrated the use of a CLI command locally. We demonstrated abstracting that into a script, and specifically we made use of a task runner. We showed how we can run those scripts and locally, and then we showed how we can make use of automated test frameworks like Mocha, and then we showed the construction of a Jenkins file and connecting Jenkins with Docker and ultimately kicking off this in a pipeline. And we also showed that we can archive things for audit purposes or visibility or whatever your need is right inside of Jenkins so that all folks can view this information. Let me return just briefly to the slide deck. Okay, so with that, I think we were pretty good in our goal of reserving some time for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions for setting this up in their environment or just general questions about either the CLI, scripting with the CLI, or making this work in a Jenkins environment, feel free to ask now.
Great, thanks, Michael. We do have one question that came in during the course of your session. The first one is, how is Docker helpful on mainframe?
So what I'm using the Docker image for in this case is to run my CLI commands from it. So let's say another way to run this Jenkins pipeline would have been just to run it on the machine where Jenkins is hosted. But the benefit of Docker in this case is I'd say there's two key benefits. One is you can run multiple pipelines in parallel with Docker, and the other is that I'm not dependent on the configuration of the Jenkins machine, right? I'm ensured that I've defined a Docker image and that all my orchestration is happening from that single place. So it's the idea of sort of agreeing upon what environment things should be tested in, and then ensuring that all tests, all pipelines are run in that environment.
All right, thanks, Michael. There are no other questions in the questions box right now, folks. If you would like to be unmuted to ask your questions that way, there's a way right in the system to virtually raise your hand. If you do that, I can go ahead and unmute you. Give everyone a minute either to type their question or to raise their hands. Here's another question for you, Michael. Is the web interface necessary?
So for this use case I presented today, I did not use the web interface. All I had to have set up for this demonstration was I needed to have the REST services I was interacting with set up, Zowe SMF, CA Endeavor, CA FileMaster Plus, and then I needed the CLI installed locally, and that's all I would need for this orchestration. Now, we do recommend that as you have more services set up, you would route all this through a API mediation layer. But I did not need the Zowe web UI set up for this demonstration. Additionally, maybe just one thing to show really quick is as far as a sort of UI presentation layer in here, I do typically in my day-to-day development, I sort of make use of this Zowe VS Code extension. This is also built on the CLI, and it's available on the marketplace today. You can search data sets in here. So for example, just to show this, and this also sort of just built on top of the CLI. I can look at some of the jobs I submitted and see that they completed successfully with the data I expected. And to ascertain this plugin, all you have to do is go to your extensions in VS Code and search for the Zowe VS Code extension. I hope that's helpful.
All right, and another question. Can we use MuleSoft?
MuleSoft. So I apologize. I'm not familiar with MuleSoft. If you could expand on that question. If it's a distributed tool set that's available for you, and you can run scripts or run commands from it, then yeah, you could make use of MuleSoft. I'm just unfamiliar with that technology.
All right, let's see. A couple more questions. Is Zowe a freeware?
Yeah, so Zowe is free and open source. Again, you can just go to, as I showed earlier, you can just go to zowe.org, and it's all available here. There's information about downloading it just to use it. There's information about getting involved in the community. So there's a Slack channel list. If you're setting this up and you need to ask questions, you just register an account here, and you can go to the Zowe CLI Slack channel and ask questions. Documentation available. Also, all of the code for Zowe is available on GitHub. So, for example, Zowe CLI code, it's at this URL, and we can go view it, and it's all publicly available. Now, one note on that is, as I showed, let me just go back. Beyond Zowe, Broadcom offers CA Brightside, which is our support offering for Zowe. So it offers comprehensive support from initial testing clear through adoption, and then also provides a couple of value adds, like I mentioned, simplified and streamlined installation and early access to some of these latest innovations that aren't yet available in Zowe.
Great, thanks, Michael. A couple more. Can we run zConnect APIs?
zConnect APIs. Okay, so ZOS Connect has built a plugin. So it's not, I don't believe it's fully open source, but if you, let me share, let me try to find that really quick. So if you just search ZOS Connect Zowe CLI, I think it'll show up. So there's a Zowe CLI plugin for ZOS Connect, and it's available on, it's also available on public NPM. So here's sort of some information about Zowe CLI plugin for ZOS Connect EE, and you can do things like install new services, updating services, and I would just recommend, again, checking out IBM's documentation for that plugin.
All right, let me see what else we have here. Does it support rollback situations in an environment, and how does it handle it with minimal impact?
Okay, so I guess I would look towards maybe how you're handling the rollback process today, and think about ways the CLI can help automate that. So as an example, maybe in your delivery process, right? Maybe you're casting a package if you're maybe using CA Endeavor and preparing it for deployment, and you promote it to the next stage, right? And then you roll it into your test environment, and it fails. You could have your pipeline automate the process of, upon a failed test in that environment, rolling those changes back. So you could definitely sort of automate that procedure, and it's likely the CLI could help you with that automation.
Great, thanks. One more I see coming in. Can we interact with Endeavor instead of GitHub in Jenkins?
Right, yeah, so what I was, I'll try to be a little bit more clear, I guess, on what I showed. So let's say let's go to the Broadcom Jenkins sample. And what I have stored in GitHub is my Jenkins file. So it contains the logic to orchestrate, some series of tasks. And a lot of these include orchestration of tasks on ZOS. So in that pipeline run, right, let me pull up this pipeline run. In this pipeline run, I'm doing the builds in Endeavor. So you can think about how things progress today in your shop, in your environment. So today, if I was doing this interactively, I would need to get sort of, at least in our environment, I would need to navigate to the Endeavor UI and do a generate on the elements. And then there's some automation in there, right, to do the build of the elements. So I'm making use of what already exists today. I'm just automating it remotely in a Jenkins environment. Similar can be said for Rex and JCL technology. So if you have Rex scripts and JCL you make use of in your processes today, you can continue to make use of them remotely because the CLI allows you to submit jobs and view output, and you can automate some of that. As an example, in the deploy step, or in the deploy step, there's a job that submit to do the binding grant on the table, and then also in the test in the test portion, I showed it actually is submitting these jobs under the covers, like through the CLI, which they're coming back in my view. So just to view one, I'm making sure that when I did that test to create a marble, I'm ensuring that my inventory for this rose marble is 1, which is what I added in the test. Because before I ran that, if this is the right job ID, I ran test a couple of times. Let me get the one. Yeah, before I ran that test, it looked like this, where I didn't have something added. So I'm submitting a job, and this is just in my spool with the DD name sysprint.
Okay, another question just came in. Let's see if I can read the whole thing. You mean no need to move the source code to GitHub? Things can still work as is from Endeavor, however it's working today.
That's right. So there's no sort of, using this solution, there's no sort of migration needed. But I will note we also have an offering where you can get GitHub Endeavor integration, so that if folks in your shop were interested in interacting like with the code base Endeavor, the same way that they're interacting with today, they could make use of that solution. So they would get things like, pull requests and things like that. But as far as automating this in a pipeline, you can just orchestrate sort of the activities you would manually do on Endeavor today remotely with the use of the CLI. Just to show, since there's interest there, if you look, there is a lot of actions you can take through the Zowe Endeavor plugin. So we see things like casting packages, backing in, backing out packages, and Endeavor approving packages. Depends on your exact use case and what you're interested in automating. But this is sort of the full set of remote interaction. And if there's something that's not available here, feel free to reach out to us, and we can prioritize that going forward.
Thanks, Michael. One more question. Can we archive?
So when we say archive, if we're talking about archiving in Jenkins, that's what I've done here. So I ran the test to generate a report, and I could archive that artifact. So here I get a log of my pipeline of everything I orchestrated, and I also have a nice view of my test results. If there's a specific even if there's like a specific element you would like to archive as a result of this build, maybe some binary or something, you could certainly do that.
All right, this is the follow-up. It's archiving in Endeavor using the CLI.
Okay, let's see here. Archiving in Endeavor. I'm not 100% sure offhand, so maybe, I'm not sure who's asking the question offhand, but maybe we can get, maybe Len, if you provide their information, we can follow up with them offline.
Absolutely. All right, folks, it looks like we have time for maybe one more question. So we'll give you a moment to type it in there. And again, I would invite you to fill out our quick survey after I close the event, just to give Michael some feedback and me some feedback. We'd really appreciate that. All right, that doesn't look like anything else is coming in, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up. So folks, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And Michael, great job as always. And this Mainframe DevOps webcast series will continue next month. So look out in the communities for an announcement soon. So take it easy and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.